The Silicon Valley Leadership Group Annual Forum thanks its co-title sponsors, AMD and Trimble, as well as its production sponsor, Zoom. Thank you. Levi's Stadium, home of the San Francisco 49ers. Oh, okay, that's too much social distancing. You can get closer. Go ahead. Okay, that's better. Home of the San Francisco 49ers and players Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle.
We're all a little bit further apart this year. It doesn't matter as long as we
connect wherever we are. Now let's throw it to SVLG Chairman Jed York.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jed York, Chair of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and I'd like to welcome you to our annual 2020 forum. Thank you to so many of our members, partners, and media for being a part of it, even if we are apart for it. There's no denying the impact COVID-19 has had on all of our lives, on all of our businesses, and in all of our communities. It's a time where we're looking for answers, and I can say that the best way to look for answers is through science, something Silicon Valley knows something about, which is why we're so honored to have with us today Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Fauci is the most trusted doctor in the country when it comes to understanding this pandemic. He's the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Dr. Fauci has advised 6 different presidents on HIV and AIDS and other global health issues. Now he's at the forefront of the search for a cure of COVID-19. Talking with Dr. Fauci today is someone who's become a very good friend of mine, Ahmad Thomas. He's a former Barclays executive with a unique blend of finance, social leadership, and public policy expertise. But more importantly than that, he's the son of a retired nurse. He's the husband of a doctor. And I know he's a man that is deeply connected to the conversation that he's about to have with Dr. Fauci. It's with that I am proud to introduce Ahmad Thomas and Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Jed, thank you very much. And Jimmy G, George Kittle, thank you for that great kickoff. Good luck this weekend against the Seahawks. Dr. Fauci, you're a patriot. Thank you for being here today and for all that you do for our country.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Well, let's get right to it. We've got a few thousand leaders here in Silicon Valley, both business executives and community leaders on the line. And the first question is about where things stand in our country with this virus. As you know well, new cases are rising steadily across the country. We're at the 90,000 number, and a number of states have test positivity rates above 10%. Are we in the midst of a second wave? And are we as a country prepared, PPE, ICU capacity, et cetera, to manage?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to point out, and the terminology you used, are we going to go to a second wave? We never got out of the first wave. That's really the problem. So let me just very briefly explain why we are in such a precarious situation today. When we first got hit badly, it was dominated predominantly by what was going on in the New York metropolitan area, where in the spring, about 40% of the cases, as the hospitalizations and the deaths, were there. But as they came back down, we never got down to a real low baseline because the other areas of the country began to get hot, as it were, in the standpoint of cases. So our baseline, unlike Europe, which when they got hit badly, they came down to a very low baseline. Our baseline was about 20,000 new cases a day. Then we tried to, you might recall, Ahmad, open up the economy, as it were. And we had some guidelines that if followed strictly, I think the situation would have been a little bit different, but we were very disparate among different states and cities of how we did it. And as we tried to do that, we saw a resurgence of cases predominantly dominated by southern states, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, and Southern California, that went up to about 70,000 cases a day, which then came back down to 40,000 and stuck at 40 for a month or two. Now, fast forward to today, what you just described, we're seeing hotspots literally throughout the entire country, so that we're now averaging on a weekly basis about 70,000 cases a day, where more than 40 states are upticking with increases in cases, which will ultimately lead to increases in hospitalizations and then ultimately with increases in deaths. So we're breaking records for daily numbers of cases. Several months ago, I testified before a Senate committee, and I said, if we don't get control of this, we might get 100,000 cases a day. And I was blasted for that because they were saying I was being too alarmist. We're getting close to that right now. And one of the things that's of great concern to me is that as we enter into most regions of the country, into the cool months of the fall and the cold months of the winter, much of what is going to be done indoors. And indoors, when you have a respiratory disease, is a very problematic situation. So I'm concerned, unless we do something to turn this around, we're going to have a very difficult, very painful winter as we enter into those cold months. You know, just to finish by my first statement, there are 5 things that you can do without necessarily shutting the country down. No one has an appetite to shut the country down again. But if we have universal wearing of masks, physical distancing, avoiding congregate settings and crowds, and doing things more indoors versus outdoors and washing hands, we do not necessarily have to accept the inevitability of these major surges that we're seeing. Because if we do, as we get into November, December, and January, it's going to be a very, very difficult time in the United States.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci. You've outlined a precarious situation, and maybe to pivot, a positive pivot here with the vaccine. Where do things stand in terms of the realistic timeline for a vaccine?
Well, you're right. Let's pivot. I pivot for some sobering things that I told you to something that's relatively good news. So the federal government has been subsidizing either in the development of or the facilitation of the clinical trials of 6 separate vaccines, 5 of which right now are in advanced phase 3 clinical trial to determine efficacy as well as safety. 2 of the candidates of the 5 have gone into phase 3 trial on July 27th. They are having anywhere from 30,000 to 44,000 and up to 60,000 individual volunteers per trial. Right now, 2 of those trials are fully enrolled, the Moderna trial and the Pfizer trial, which means that we should be able to get an inkling of whether or not we have a safe and effective vaccine sometime in mid to end of November, beginning of December. I'm cautiously optimistic, although you can never guarantee when you're dealing with vaccine development, but I'm optimistic based on preliminary data from the phase 1 study that we will in fact have a safe and effective vaccine. I don't know how effective it's going to be. I hope it's going to be somewhere around 70 to 75%, but we won't know that until we complete the trial. If we are successful, we will be able to start administering vaccine doses by the end of this calendar year, or more likely in the beginning of 2021. And then the doses, and there will be hundreds of millions of doses being produced already, will gradually, in a graded fashion, get distributed to those who are in need of it over the subsequent 4, 5, 6 months, so that hopefully by the time we get to the 3rd quarter of 2021, we will have vaccinated the vast majority of people, provided people want to get vaccinated. That's one of the issues we're going to face. There's some skepticism about vaccines, which we have to overcome by outreach into the community.
Well, Dr. Fauci, let me ask you that question directly. And the polling data, which I'm sure you've seen here in California, about 2/3 of respondents, this was earlier this month, the Public Policy Institute of California, had concerns about the virus and that it was being rushed. And when we look at these numbers that show, certainly in California, a pretty high level of mistrust. And as you know well, there's a lot of information out there that's not accurate. How do you respond to those out there unwilling to trust our leaders on the vaccine? And I'll ask you a pointed question, because we trust you. Will you be an early vaccine recipient or make a definitive statement on the safety and efficacy of the vaccine when it's available?
Well, let me answer your last question first, Ahmad. The answer to that is absolutely yes. I will make a statement about that. And let me tell you why. I understand the skepticism that people have for a number of reasons. There have been some mixed signals and some issues that have come out of Washington that I think have not been the clearest.
You're very kind, Dr. Fauci.
Yeah. Yes, let's be somewhat discreet about this. So I understand that. So the way around that is to be completely transparent with the American public of what the process is in the decision of the determination of whether a vaccine is safe and effective, so that the American public will understand and appreciate and believe that this is something that will be for their own good and their own protection. So let me very briefly go through it. Every vaccine trial has attached to it what's called a Data and Safety Monitoring Board, a completely independent group of clinicians, vaccinologists, statisticians, and ethicists who look at the data. They are the only ones that have access to the data in a blinded fashion. They answer to no one. They don't answer to the president. They don't answer to the pharmaceutical company. They are part of the clinical trial process. Intermittently, they will look at the data and determine, should you continue the trial? You still haven't gotten enough information. Or they will look at the data and say, my goodness, it looks like the placebo is doing better than the vaccine. Maybe the vaccine is hurting you. Let's stop the study. Or hopefully they'll say, we now have enough data to say that the vaccine is safe and effective. Once they do that, they will then make the data public. I will see it as the director of the institute that is involved in the overall clinical trials, and the companies will see it. They will then examine the data. The career scientists, not the politicians, the career scientists of the FDA will look at the data, and another independent advisory committee called the VRBPAC committee will look at the data and advise the FDA as to whether grant this either emergency use authorization or an actual licensure. When they do that, Ahmad, it is totally public. I will see it, and all of my scientific colleagues will see it. So if anybody tries to do an end run about getting something approved before it's ready for the American public, that won't happen. I can promise you that. The process that's in place is independent of political manipulation. And I can tell you, apropos of your first question to me, I will be very open with the American public about my impression of whether or not this is safe and effective.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fauci. And you've mentioned multiple vaccines. Would different populations be better protected by one vaccine versus the other? And does that create further delays to the timeline that you just laid out?
Well, that's a good question. It is conceivable that some vaccines might be more effective in children or pregnant women versus adults versus elderly. We will find that out generally within a given trial, because, for example, although because of safety issues, you want to wait before you put it into children and pregnant women, hopefully not wait too long. The clinical trials will tell us that. It really depends, Ahmad, about how effective the vaccine is that's the first one out of the gate. I mean, I hope and I believe that we will have more than one safe and effective vaccine. That being the case, the common question I get asked, someone will say, well, if a vaccine is proved to be effective, should I try and get it right now or maybe hold off and wait to see if you get a better one 2 or 3 months later? It depends on how effective it is and what your risk category is. If you're a very young, healthy, robust person, the chances of your getting into trouble with COVID-19 is relatively low. If you're someone with an underlying condition or an elderly person with an underlying condition, you might not want to wait. You might want to say, I'm going to get the first vaccine available because I'm in a risk group. So it really is going to be determining what your relative risk is.
Well, as the vaccine is developed, we've seen, and the president was treated very publicly with some of the new therapeutics and those advancements. What do we know about those at this stage, and how do those therapeutics dovetail with the provision of the vaccine, as you noted?
Well, absolutely important. Vaccines are to prevent infection, as you know, and the therapeutics that the president and others got is to treat someone who's already infected. We have some good treatments for advanced disease, and that's the reason why the death rates are going down, even though we're having a lot of new infections, because we know how better to treat people, and we have tools that have been proven in randomized placebo-controlled trials to be effective in diminishing the death rate. Now, what we really do need a lot more of, and there are many clinical trials that are aimed at getting information to prove or not the effectiveness of these drugs, are things that are given early. Like if you or I got infected and we had symptoms, what do we need to do to prevent us from having to go to the hospital, or to prevent us from getting advanced serious disease that might require intensive care? There are a number of clinical trials looking at convalescent plasma, monoclonal antibodies, hyperimmune globulin, and a number of other interventions. So I would expect that in the next month or so, you're going to be seeing a number of more therapies, particularly those that can be given early in the course of disease.
Well, Dr. Fauci, before we move to our regional panel, I want to make sure to ask a question about you. I get real mad when people say things that aren't nice about you. And a lot of us, and a few thousand of the executives on the line feel the same way. So we've got your back here in Silicon Valley. But how do you do self-care in this pandemic? And what can our executives and community leaders learn from you about your routine and resiliency through what is an extremely trying time, certainly for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for your offer to cover my back. Every once in a while, I need that, in addition to my wife, who's always there covering my back. Well, I don't think I should be an example, Ahmad, of how one should be taking care of themselves in this, because I'm in a very unusual position in that I'm running the institute that's responsible for the development of the vaccines and the therapies, at the same time as being a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. So I have to say I haven't gotten a day off since January, which is not a healthy thing. Literally, I have not had a day off since January, and the hours are really grueling, but it's one of those things that I just say, and I don't mean this in a heroic way, it just is what it is. I just have to suck it up and say, this is a very unusual time. My time will come to kick up my heels and, have a beer or something, but right now it's not going to happen. There are just too many important things going on. So don't use me as a model for health.
Well, you've earned it. And now we'll go to our larger regional panel.
A big thank you to Dr. Fauci, not only for participating today, but for his steadfast leadership in troubled times, and to Ahmad Thomas for this opportunity. At Blue Shield of California, we have a nonprofit mission to create a healthcare system that's worthy of our family and friends and sustainably affordable for everyone. This pandemic has severely challenged that notion, particularly for people of color. They face enormous health, social, and economic challenges. So if we're going to fulfill our mission, address this pandemic, and truly transform the system, we need to bring healthcare into the digital age, which means we need a comprehensive, real-time digital record for all Californians and ultimately all Americans. The bottom line is we can't make progress unless we can measure it. And I think there's a great opportunity to do just that in the coming year. And I look forward to working with all of you to make that happen. And now for the panel portion of our forum. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sara Cody, who is the Health Officer and Public Health Director of Santa Clara County, and her colleague, Dr. Marty Fenstersheib, who worked with her in the early 2000s on a pandemic response model. They're going to join Ahmad and Dr. Fauci in a panel discussion, so please enjoy.
Dr. Cody, Dr. Fenstersheib, thank you so much for joining us in this very important discussion. And I'll get right to it, talking about COVID here in California and what we've seen in terms of different approaches hyperlocally in the Bay Area with our counties and counties across our state. And Dr. Cody in particular, you've been a leader and out front here in Santa Clara County. Who's done it right or not? And how do we create more uniformity?
Thank you. And before I begin, I just want to say what an extraordinary privilege it is to be alongside Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci, thank you for coming to our region, albeit virtually. We hope one day you can come in person. I think one of the unique characteristics of California is that in state law, quite a bit of responsibility is given to local health officers. Every county in the state has a local health officer who is a physician and has the authority and the responsibility to make decisions to protect the population. Marty held that role before I did for many, many years, passed the baton to me, and then has come back to be at my side so we can do this together. But that has won in California. The health officers are a very connected group. We communicate with each other a lot. And we were all together really from the very beginning in January, trying to think through the risks to the population in our respective communities. So I think an advantage that we had in California was these relationships and these connections and this working together, as well as the law behind us to make decisions such as issuing the first shelter-in-place order in March. And I do think that that early action enabled us to suppress the amount of community transmission early on. And our challenge since then is to keep community transmission as low as possible so that we can reopen gradually.
On the reopen question, and so many of us have young kids in school. My two boys are watching on Zoom this morning. Can we speak to the school reopenings? What is the data showing us? Has it been safe? Do kids need to be tested? And if so, how often?
Well, I think I also have children who are doing Zoom school, and I think this is an enormous challenge for all of us. I would say that here locally, actually one of our great priorities has been to be able to enable in-person learning for kids. We know that the distance learning has helped to magnify and accelerate educational inequities. However, we also know that there is great concern, rightly so, by teachers and staff about the risks of coming together for in-person learning. So our approach locally has been the following. One, to try to keep, again, the rates of community transmission as low as possible to enable reopenings, including schools. And the other is to provide guidance to our schools, both public and private. And we're thinking about it in a couple different ways. For younger children, we know that they like to be together and congregate. It might be a little bit harder to keep them apart and to keep them wearing masks. We do have guidelines that ask them to stay apart and be masked, but we also know how important it is that they remain in small, stable cohorts and really limit the mixing and do as much outside as they can inside. And certainly our California climate helps facilitate that. And then for older students, really important that they maintain a distance and wear their masks. It's much more difficult to maintain small cohorts. So that's our frame. We also have an extraordinary schools team in our Emergency Operations Center. We work with the schools and support them with advice and technical assistance and really whatever they need to help them do what they can to support their kids and transition to an in-person model as safely as possible.
And Dr. Fauci, on the schools question in our children, is there any additional data to comment on or information to share?
No, I think Dr. Cody really outlined what the optimal approach is. I mean, in general, across the country, and we have a large, diverse country, as you know, that have different levels of infection, which would really dictate the enthusiasm or not of various programs to get the kids back to school. The default position we feel should be as best as possible to get the children back to school, as opposed to making the default when you have infections, keep them out of school. But if you're going to make that decision to keep them in school or bring them back to school, you have to have a program that has a plan to respond, A, to what you're going to do if one or more of the children get infected, and two, what do you do to mitigate against their getting infected? And if you look at the country, we're divided into dark green, green, yellow, orange, and red zones. It depends on what zone you're in about what you really need to do. The one thing we do know that children can get infected and do get infected. There's multiple examples of that. They certainly statistically don't get as seriously ill or even ill at all to the extent that adults do. But some children can get seriously ill, and they certainly can transmit infection. Particularly children from 10 to 19 can transmit to adults as easily as adults can transmit to adults. So you've got to take infection in children seriously. Having said that, the program and the approach that Dr. Cody just outlined makes absolutely perfect sense to me as where you are right now in California.
Well, as a parent, that's wonderful to hear. And Dr. Fenstersheib, I'd like to bring you into the conversation as we talk about, we've got business leaders on the line. We want to see a reopen, certainly a smart reopen as soon as we possibly can. And can you speak to the balance between the very real economic considerations and fallout wrought by this pandemic versus preserving lives? I know there's a line.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And again, we've been focused mainly on the pandemic, preserving lives, but I think it's a balance. We have been working very hard in our community to bring down the infection rate and the positivity rate. And so when we get down to where we are now, which we are in this orange zone or orange tier in California, we are much more comfortable that opening businesses is safer. And we've been working with a risk reduction policy where we basically say, let's look at the activity, let's look at the business, and is it outside? Is it inside? Outside is always safer. Can you put on a mask? Can you separate yourself? So outside dining is certainly safer than inside dining, where you have to take off your mask. So I think basically we have been working with the community, working with the business community, and it's a struggle. It's a balance, but we can't open businesses until our infection rates is down as low as it is, which it is, and we want to keep it there. We don't want it to go up. We don't want to go backwards. Excuse me. We don't want to go backwards where we then would have to shut down businesses again. So it's a matter of being vigilant, being patient, and the community as a whole needs to be on board and work with everyone else. It's a community-wide issue, and we have to all work together to make everyone else safe.
And for our businesses reopening, should wearing masks and social distancing indoors provide a high degree of confidence that your chance, my chance, if I'm an employee coming in, of contracting COVID-19 is in fact remote?
Well, nothing is remote, nothing is 100% in medicine, but for sure, using all of those precautions are very important. And the more we use, the better we are. Again, we put on a mask, we socially distance ourselves, we use proper hygiene, and in that way, we are safer. Again, when we start taking off our mask in a restaurant, for instance, we then have to look at issues around ventilation, how close the tables are. So I think it's a measured approach, looking at a lot of the factors and realizing that not one factor alone obviously is going to work, that it's a multiple list of factors that we have to put together, use as many as we can. And I should mention also, as we were talking about vaccines, we know that even with the vaccine, people are still going to have to be vigilant, still wear the mask, and still do all of the things that we have said until we really know that we have the protection in the community as a whole, which is probably going to take, as Dr. Fauci said, probably quite a long time.
Well, let me ask Dr. Fauci and Dr. Cody that question, the logistics of getting Americans vaccinated. What are the most significant logistical challenges that you anticipate? Maybe Dr. Fauci for our country and Dr. Cody here locally in Silicon Valley.
Well, one of the logistic issues that clearly is right up front is that the candidates that are ahead right now, in the sense temporally, not necessarily the best, but at least temporally, that would likely be the ones that will be deployed sooner, is the cold chain issues. Namely, do you have local capabilities of maintaining the vaccine at the right temperature as you're waiting to distribute it? That's something that is being worked out now by logistics and supply chain people. In fact, you can't just assume that local clinics are going to be able to adequately and effectively administer it if they don't have the proper equipment and the proper training or what have you. And that's something that has to go on now if you're going to start deploying in January, February, and March. So that's just one of a number of issues that are logistic or technical that you have to address.
And that's exactly how we're needing to plan on the local level, to think that we don't know which vaccine it's going to be, but we need to plan in case it's one of these vaccines that requires freezing at very low temperatures. So at the local level, our job is the local logistics. So thinking about which vaccines it might be, what are the storage and handling requirements, do they need one dose or two? How far apart? It's a little different for each vaccine. And so locally, we want to plan for whatever comes to pass. We want to ensure that we can distribute it most efficiently to the priority groups when the vaccine comes into our hands. So we have those plans well underway.
So
I would emphasize also that we also are aware that a lot of communities in our county, communities especially of color, are somewhat mistrusting of a lot of things that government does. And we're very concerned about getting the messages out about the safety, eventual safetiness of the vaccine. And that basically the people in these communities that are hardest hit will be able to take advantage of the vaccine and be assured and comfortable. And it's going to take communication and messages from the people that they trust in the community, their own doctors, the community leaders, to basically bring these messages so that we can accurately and effectively vaccinate those at highest risk.
Well, let's talk about that, Dr. Fenstersheib. And COVID-19 has been very, very hard for people of color, and it's disproportionately affected Black and Brown Americans. It's true in Silicon Valley and across California. What have we learned? And is there enough focus in your view on the systemic healthcare disparities that have exacerbated this pandemic?
That's a very important question. And in all aspects that we are working, we see the effect of the issues that the Black and Brown community have brought to us. Everything from testing and not really sure whether it's safe to be tested, not knowing or trusting what will happen if they're positive. Will they lose their job if they tell people that they were positive? Will they be comfortable again with the measures that we are asking them to take? In a lot of instances, communities of color are living in conditions that are crowded, and again, they can't isolate as well as we would like them. So again, it's been a working partnership with the community making services available to them so that they can go and isolate or quarantine themselves in a safe location, that we have been able to provide assistance so that they can pay their rent, so that they can pay their food bills and feed their families. But again, as I said before, the messages need to come from within the community. So we have boots on the ground in parts of our community and in parts of our county that are most effective, so that those messages get to the people and provide the information they need to stay safe.
And Dr. Fauci, is there any additional perspective that you have to share or add to what Dr. Fenstersheib shared around the disproportionate impact that Black and Brown communities have felt throughout this crisis?
Well, there's a double whammy against the brown and Black communities by the virtue of the jobs that, as a demographic group that they generally have, they are more out on the front line, physically out interacting with people. So the incidence and the prevalence of infection among predominantly Latinx and African Americans is higher. Yet, when you look at the underlying comorbidities, which very strongly determine whether or not you're going to have a severe outcome of COVID-19, the disparity there is striking. Black and brown people have many, many more of the comorbidities from an incidence standpoint than the normal general population, including whites. For example, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, chronic lung disease, heart disease. So the rate of hospitalization per 100,000 persons, when you compare Black and brown people, which are at around somewhere between 375 and 380 per 100,000, compared to white, which is 82, that is a striking disparity. So what does that come down to? We've got to get Black and brown people vaccinated because they are among the most vulnerable. The only way we're going to convince them is what Marty just said about getting community people that they trust to get them to get vaccinated. But another way to do that is to get them enrolled in the vaccine trials so that when a vaccine is proven to be safe and effective, we can look the minority population in the eye and say, not only is it effective and safe in whites, we've proven that it's safe and effective in you because you've been a major participant in the clinical trial. So it's a two-step process. First, get them into the clinical trials so they can show it works in them, and then make sure they get vaccinated in the community level to prevent infection.
Can I jump in one more second and agree with Dr. Fauci? And also, we haven't talked about testing, but the frontline workers need to be tested. And we have been working very hard to have a very robust testing program in our community. We even have a health order requiring the large health providers to test all of the frontline workers when they make themselves available. And we would ask business to please allow your frontline workers to get tested at least on a monthly basis and to be able to stay home also if they become symptomatic.
Well, let's transition to the testing and the solutions discussion. And Dr. Cody, maybe I'll ask you, if you were the president of Silicon Valley, what would you ask our business leaders to focus on? Clearly, we have research and technology working to combat COVID. But when you're looking at where we are now and where we're going in terms of logistics management for a vaccine, what should our business leaders be focused on?
Thank you. First, I want to say that just to echo Dr. Fauci's words, there really has been a double whammy. So the communities that are most impacted are both feeling the pain of the economic situation as well as the pandemic. And I think that there are structural inequities that have really laid bare the inequities in certain communities. And so we're really at the forefront of research and technology here in Silicon Valley, but I think that the solutions needed are going to be those that address the underlying inequities. However, there are a number of, there are so many things that each and every one of us can do and the community can do to help. And just a couple of them to think about are, one, we have great visibility and granular detail about the health impacts of COVID on our community. We have great data on the non-COVID health impacts, but we don't have visible for the public so that we can see side by side what the other impacts are on the economics of the community. And I think it might be nice, just in the name of transparency, to be able to see that all together to integrate it. The other is back to our schools, and something that Marty mentioned and Dr. Fauci mentioned, all of the different prevention measures that we need to have, those layered prevention from wearing masks to keeping distance to ventilation to enable our schools to open for in-person learning. And maybe this is something that our businesses can help with to say, adopt a public school and help them think through how to improve ventilation. Many of the facilities are quite old. And this might be a partnership that would be helpful. I would also say that, even here in Silicon Valley, our data management infrastructure for really critical public health surveillance data is not what it needs to be, not locally or statewide or even nationally. We excel at these sorts of things in Silicon Valley. So I know there have been partnerships, and I think more partnerships in the future for our basic public health infrastructure would be fantastic.
Well, Dr. Cody, that is a positive note to end on here. We have our marching orders. Thank you, Dr. Cody. Thank you, Dr. Fenstersheib, for all you're doing in our community. And Dr. Fauci, again, you're a true patriot. Thank you very, very much for making time to speak to leaders in Silicon Valley today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vicki Huff-Eckert, Treasurer of the Board of Silicon Valley Leadership Group and Vice Chairman at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I want to thank Ahmad and all of our panelists for making the time to talk with us today with so much on their plate about the important issues we face with this pandemic. More important, I would like to thank them for all the great work, the work of so many medical professionals in the face of COVID's tremendous challenge. Dr. Cody, Dr. Fenstersheib, and of course, Dr. Fauci, from all of us at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, thank you.
The Silicon Valley Leadership Group Annual Forum thanks its co-presenting sponsors, Bank of America, Blue Shield of California, Kaiser Permanente, Sand Hill Property Company, and Western Digital Corporation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jason Baker, Vice President of Transportation, Housing, and Community Development for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. And I'd like to tell you where the SVLG stands on some important regional measures and state ballot propositions for this November's election.
Hello, friends. I'm San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, and I hope that you'll join me in voting yes for Measure RR to save Caltrain, to create thousands of jobs, and to save our environment. You know, the pandemic has chased a lot of traffic off our roads, but it's going to come back. And when it does, we'll need Caltrain. Because without Caltrain, more than 4 lanes of traffic will be added back onto 101 and adjoining roads. And that just means more noise, more air pollution, and slower commutes for all of us. With Measure RR, Caltrain will keep millions of cars off our roads every year while providing faster, cleaner, and more frequent trains to all of our cities along the peninsula. I hope you join me in supporting Caltrain and in supporting the Bay Area's future. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angelica Cortez, heading up racial justice and equity issues for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and we urge you to vote yes on Prop 16. Prop 16 would end California's ban on affirmative action and once again allow policymakers to consider race and gender when making decisions about contracts, hiring, and education. As an important step in helping to level the playing field, Prop 16 would promote equal treatment for women and people of color in the broader fight for equity.
Hi, I'm Mike Milkey, Senior Vice President for Energy and Environment with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We ask that you vote yes on Measure S to continue critical funding for safe, clean drinking water and natural flood protection. Measure S, supported by the San Jose Mercury News, restores creeks and rivers and protects Santa Clara County from flooding for decades to come, all without raising taxes.
Thanks for listening, and remember, your voice counts. Be sure to make it heard. Please vote November 3rd.
Hi there, I'm Chris Boyd. I'm the Senior Executive at Kaiser Permanente Santa Clara. I'd like to share with you for the next few minutes what the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Foundation and our member companies and executives have been up to make a difference in our community. The Applied Materials Silicon Valley Turkey Trot has long been a Silicon Valley Leadership Group and local community tradition. This year, it takes a new step by going virtual, letting runners chart their own route to run safely in a time of social distancing. As the official sponsor for the How I Thrive contest, Kaiser Permanente is proud to bring an interactive component to the race. While registering, tell us how running the Turkey Trot makes you thrive in health, wellness, and community involvement. And the top 2 entries will receive a prize on race day. COVID-19 has affected us all, but one group tremendously impacted has been our children. COVID-19 has disconnected education for 37,000 local underserved students. The long-term digital divide is now an immediate physical one. The Leadership Group, EY, San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, and the San Jose Digital Inclusion Fund are partnering to provide computers to students who need it the most. Member companies can get involved by making financial donations or donations of gently used devices. By providing students with needed devices, Silicon Valley companies can assist these young learners disconnected from education through no fault of their own. And we can help grow a future workforce that is tech-savvy, inclusive, and diverse. Last, but certainly not least, I want to recognize some important work that we've already done. When COVID-19 began impacting our communities and companies here in the Silicon Valley, our hospitals and other healthcare facilities, along with all others across the country, were in desperate need of personal protective equipment. And our members and executives responded, raising over $9 million for the PPE to protect our frontline medical workers and the patients we care for. Efforts were led by our past CEO and longtime leader, Carl Guardino, and the Valley Medical Center Foundation. This effort helped give our medical community what they needed to stay in the daily fight against this unprecedented pandemic. To our Silicon Valley Leadership Group member companies and their executives who stepped up to contribute to protect our community, as well as the physicians, EMTs, nurses, frontline responders, and other medical workers who step forward every day in the face of COVID-19. We say thank you.
And now we come to our Spirit of Silicon Valley Award and our honoree, AMD President and CEO, Dr. Lisa Su. I was incredibly excited to give this award and talk about Lisa's work in business, receiving the prestigious Dr. Morris Chang Exemplary Leadership Award, on being elected to the American Academy of Arts and Science this year, on being named one of the most powerful women in business by Fortune magazine, on being a leader and also an engineer at a time when we've never needed role models for young women in STEM education more. I say I was excited to give this award because when you get a call from Congresswoman Eshoo saying she would like to give the award instead, that's when you bow out gracefully and let your representative take over. So to present the Spirit of Silicon Valley Award from the California 18th District, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo.
Thank you, Ahmad, for your introduction. I so appreciate it. I'm Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, and I'm so pleased to be with you today to honor Dr. Lisa Su, a leader with a transformative impact here in Silicon Valley. As an engineer with more than 40 technical articles, she was named a fellow of the Institute of Electronics and Electrical Engineers in 2009 and elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 2018. As a business leader, she was named Business Person of the Year by Fortune magazine, named one of the world's 50 best CEOs by Barron's, and was included in the Bloomberg 50 list of people who defined the year. As an influencer in her industry, Dr. Su serves on the boards of Cisco and the U.S. Semiconductor Industry Association, and she's chair of the board of directors of the Global Semiconductor Alliance, the GSA. Dr. Su is a sterling example of the American story, and I think it's more important than ever that we tell it. Lisa Su was born in Taiwan, came to the United States with her family at the age of 3 years old. She graduated from the Bronx High School of Science and earned her bachelor's, her master's, and her PhD degrees at MIT. Her career in semiconductors was quite the circuit, starting as technical staff back in 1994 at Texas Instruments, then 13 years at IBM in various engineering and business leadership positions, including serving as vice president of IBM Semiconductor Research and Development Center. Then to Freescale Semiconductor, where as senior vice president, she was responsible for global strategy, marketing, and engineering for the company's embedded communications and applications processor business. Dr. Su joined AMD in January 2012, and in 2014 was named President and Chief Executive Officer of AMD. Since then, she's led the company to a meteoric rise in quality, impact, and most important to anyone in the semiconductor industry, performance. Today, Dr. Su is being honored by SVLG for her extraordinary leadership of AMD. But she's also being honored for her deep commitment to our community and hers, Silicon Valley. Serving as a co-chair of San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo's Silicon Valley Recovery Roundtable, she's part of finding the solution for our way back from COVID-19 for our businesses, our workers, the local economy that has been so heavily impacted by this pandemic. So on behalf of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, I am so proud to award the Spirit of Silicon Valley Lifetime of Achievement Award to a woman who has earned and richly deserves this extraordinary honor, the President and Chief Executive Officer at Advanced Micro Devices, Dr. Lisa Su.
Wow, thank you so much, Congresswoman Eshoo, for that introduction. It's really humbling. And thank you, Ahmad. You know, I am really honored to be here to receive the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Spirit of Silicon Valley Lifetime Award. I want to say that it is, really humbling when you think about what the Silicon Valley Leadership Group does. We play such an important role in the success and prosperity of the entire region. 2020, I think, has been an incredible year for all of us. I don't think any of us could imagine that when we started this year, that we'd be tested in so many different ways, both personally, professionally, as well as a region and as a country. That being said, I would say as a member of the tech industry, I'm actually happy that AMD, along with our peers and our partners, can play a role in using technology to try to alleviate and address some of the issues that have really come about due to the pandemic. And whether it's enabling businesses to continue to stay productive through work from home, or families for schooling from home, or actually using supercomputers to accelerate medical research, I think all of this is as a result of the innovation that is so much at the heart of Silicon Valley, and that we're so proud to be a part of.
AMD has actually called Silicon Valley our home for more than 50 years. And, we've always been, sort of a startup with the notion of, how do we do the best that we can with technology and push the leading edge of semiconductor products. Today, we're not so much a startup, but I would say that we still have that same passion and commitment for innovation across using technology to solve some of the world's toughest problems. So giving back to the community has been very much part of the core of AMD and something that we feel very strongly about. And this summer, I did have the honor of being a co-chair of the Silicon Valley Recovery Roundtable that Mayor Sam Liccardo had convened. And I will say it was a incredibly eye-opening experience for me. It was a great effort bringing 60 very, very busy, very capable, very important people in the Valley together, with one goal, frankly, is to bring the best that we could to the idea of defining sort of a better normal for Silicon Valley, knowing that we have so many good things, but we've also recognized a number of challenges in the past number of months. So it was an honor to be a part of that. It was an honor to really meet and spend time with all of these individuals. And as I, really think about, how lucky we are. I mean, Silicon Valley is really the best place in the world for innovation, and it's our jobs to keep it the best place in the world. I'm thrilled to be part of this community, thrilled to be able to contribute. And I want to thank you again for this recognition and honor. Now, the SVLG team has been doing outstanding things for our community. And on behalf of all of us in the community, thank you, Ahmad, and your team for everything that you do for us.
The Silicon Valley Leadership Group and the annual forum thank our plenary sponsors, Lyft, ServiceNow, and Silicon Valley Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sue, and congratulations. Our next segment is going to be a very, very good one. Dr. Art DeGius is a pioneer in Silicon Valley and a former two-time chair of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Board. Besides SVLG, he serves on the boards of Applied Materials, the Global Semiconductor Alliance, and the Electronic Design Automation Consortium. As for why, simply put, his innovative work in design software has been critical and a catalyst for Moore's Law. So it's fitting that he have a conversation with Lisa Su, a colleague in the semiconductor industry and someone who's building chips that do more with every generation. He'll talk to her about leadership, her path there, and I think some interesting things that may have come up with AMD over the past few days. Welcome, Dr. Art DeGius and Dr. Lisa Su.
Hi, Art. How are you? I think you're on mute.
Classic unmute trap. Here we go. But I think you can hear me now. Is that right?
Perfect.
Well, first, mega congratulations. I don't want to say that I saw you get there easily because there was a lot of hard work, but it is super deserved. And I am super happy that you are the person getting this award. Very well, well done. Now, we've heard already from Anna Eshu a bit about your background. And if I were to summarize, you've been fortunate to have very supportive and skilled parents, a great schooling, exposure to all the technologies that we would consider hard, which is the fun stuff. And then, of course, working in multiple companies. And so with this background, I'm sort of wondering, at which point in your life did you start to get an inkling that you actually could perhaps manage, maybe even lead? Are there moments where it starts to show up?
Well, hey, thank you, Art, and it's great to be here with you today. You know, I will say for sure, as growing up, I was classified as the nerd of the group. So, you know, many of us can be classified that way. But, you know, I think, you know, leadership is something you kind of stumble into. And when I was a young engineer at IBM, I was probably only in the business 2 years. They keep asking you, you know, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they gave me the choice, you know, do you think you want to be an IBM vice president, or do you think you want to be an IBM fellow? And I said, well, I'm nowhere near smart enough to be an IBM fellow. So I guess I have to try to manage people. So yes, no, it was very, very one of those things that, you know, was just an opportunity to, you know, continue to work with people and continue to move the ball forward. And that's how I got into management and leadership.
You know, let me confirm that you're techno nerd. Let me disagree that you could not have been a fellow. And let me reassure you that on the leadership path, you have actually moved forward fantastically well. And I'm sort of wondering, you know, if you started at that point in time to see, are there any differentiating characteristics that are truly just Lisa? And maybe they're very, very common, but maybe there's some things that, you know, the spark that you had.
You know, what I really found, Art, as I was sort of a younger engineer, is that I really enjoyed actually seeing people come together and solve things that they didn't think could be solved. You know, that feeling when, you know, you're sitting there and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're like, how am I going to solve this problem? And you realize that when you put, you know, 10 smart people in a room, they will come up with solutions that you never could have done by yourself. And then you can see teams really do the amazing or the impossible. And that's what really, you know, kept me interested in management and successfully, you know, leading larger teams over time, because the problems got even more and more interesting as you you know, expand that effort.
You know, I love the way you say that, because as we all know, you know, technology has moved to be systemically so complex that now you need many different disciplines, backgrounds to fix anything. And so the word team is so much bigger than the word individual. And maybe even unconsciously, you were already doing exactly that. Now, you said somewhere something that, and I'm sure you've taken many management courses, but that leadership can be taught. I wonder, A, what you mean with that, and B, you know, what's the one leadership trait that you see missing most often? What is it that you tend to focus on when you teach leadership?
You know, I really do believe leadership can be taught, because, you know, we are all human beings that, you know, really learn from our environment. And I think the most important thing that I've learned as I have, you know, continued to lead different teams is, you know, different people actually need different leadership styles to unlock their highest potential. You know, what I like to believe is that, you know, a leader's job is to unlock 120% of someone's potential, or 120% of a team's potential, because, you know, you're really trying to bring out the best in people, and you realize that people need different styles of leadership, you know, to do that. So I would say when I was first a young manager, I was like, boy, I didn't realize that there was all of this this stuff that needed to be done, but that really is how you bring out the best in people.
So if you look back, is there one person that at some point in time brought the best out of you, and meaning specifically brought things out of you either you didn't know you had or you didn't know you needed?
You know, I would say if I look back on my career, the most impactful you know, mentors I've had have told me when I've screwed up. And I think you might agree, Art, because you actually learn the most when you have situations that you've gone through, and somebody cares enough to tell you, you know, you could have done that better. And you sit back and say, you know, they're right. I could have done that better. And the next time you do, in fact, you know, learn from that. So I'm very big on the you know, learning moments that sometimes in the moment are a little bit painful, but as you go through it, you know, they make you a better leader, a better person, a better colleague.
Yeah, actually, I greatly agree that the greatest gift is actually honesty. And if the honesty is meant well, it is giving to somebody because you actually believe in them. You know, giving somebody negative feedback knowing they'll never make it is actually miserable. But giving negative feedback knowing that they could make it is actually investing in you, right? And so
we call it constructive art. Constructive.
Yeah. No, I know it has been packaged, but at the end of the day, the word in between there is trust. Right, trust in the giver and trust in the receiver, and when it's constructive, it can be quote painful more than receivable. So when you stepped into the job, you said you were excited. The job, meaning the AMD CEO job, excited because now you could do something meaningful, something big, and then you defined quickly for AMD sort of 3 tasks: great products, strong customer relationships, and makes things simple and fast. And I'm curious now, 6 years later, which one was the hardest, and are there any surprises in that for you?
Yeah, so it's been sort of my honor of a lifetime to be CEO of AMD. I think when you're a kid growing up in New York, you think about what can you do in life, and this has been an incredible journey for us. I think what I found most interesting is, people require clarity, and clarity is clarity of vision, mission, as well as just clarity of what are the most important things to do every day. So yes, when I started as CEO, I think my very first note that I sent to the AMD team was, our focus on these 3 things: products, customers, and simplifying our lives. Believe it or not, the hardest of that has been simplifying our lives.
Yes.
So we've got pretty good products. We've got great customer relationships, but simplicity for we all live in this world of complexity. And how do you decide what do you do first, second, third, fourth, fifth? I would say even 6 years down the road, we're still working on simplifying our lives. But I think in an industry as dynamic as we are in, and you and I both know this, we're in incredibly dynamic place. I think being able to call where you spend time and where you spend effort is so important.
Well, yeah, we are, sometimes I like to say, the heart of high tech, right, which is changing the world. And so it is extremely complex. At the same time, it's sort of cool to think of you as that kid in New York having no clue that this would ever happen. But I wonder, your relationship maybe at that time already to the financial side, to money. At what age do you think that you could, without having to ask your parents, spend, I don't know, $35, a Sony Walkman or something like that? What age were you there?
Well, I have to say, when I was a teenager, I had a paper route, so I was walking around.
Wow, yeah.
I was collecting my $2.50 a week for the week's paper. So maybe that added up to $35.
Yeah.
Like.
And this is sort of, young teenager?
Yeah. You get on your bicycle and you go and deliver the paper.
Oh, yeah. I remember it well, too. And boy, if you're late, they hate you.
Yes.
But so it's sort of interesting, $35, because, earlier this week, you spent a fair bit of money. It was not $35, but it was more like $35 billion. And most people don't know what a billion is. A billion is 1,000 million. So just for the record, you spend 35,000 millions. Is that right? You must really have wanted that Sony Walkman.
Well, I got something much better than that Sony Walkman. Actually, we are thrilled, absolutely thrilled at the acquisition of Xilinx. And for those in the Valley, they know. Xilinx is one of the premier franchises out there, just incredibly good company, incredibly great people. And, it's exciting. I mean, it's exciting. The thing about, semiconductors, as we all know, Art, is it's not a sport for the faint at heart. It is really about how do we put together, very, very talented teams to go after the right markets in the right places. So, yeah, I'm very excited about our announcement earlier this week to acquire Xilinx, and I think it's going to make the combination really a very, very strong force, defining the industry over the next 5 to 10 years.
So it strikes me you're doing that while work from home COVID. Is this sort of a case of Zoom dating here? Is that how this came about?
Well, I have to say, I've known Victor Peng, the CEO of Xilinx, for many, many years. So I think we knew each other before we had to do Zoom dating. That being the case, we did spend quite a bit of time on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Cisco WebEx, the favorite platform of the day.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, and it is about trust, and it is about culture and ensuring that our leadership teams frankly had trust in each other. But very exciting time, and yes, it did happen during this very unusual time for us in the industry.
Yeah, and Xilinx is an outstanding company, and Victor is certainly an outstanding guy in my book. But it still begs the question. Okay, I'm not sure exactly the numbers, but I assume that this adds sort of about 50% of people to AMD, and that begs not only the question of how do you do a cultural integration via WebEx, so to speak, and as a matter of fact, even without this acquisition. How do you hold the culture together and we just heard in the previous segment, this COVID thing is far from done, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Art. I think we have to, even within our own companies, we have about 13,000 people at AMD. We've been mostly work from home for, our US and European colleagues. Asia is a little bit further along, and it's taken work, as you and I have discussed. It's taken work to really, the productivity of the teams is actually really good. It's just keeping that spirit and ensuring that we continue to have that cohesiveness of culture. I will say the teams are remarkably resilient, and that's been a character as we've talked across the board. And similarly, I think as we embark on this acquisition and integration of the Xilinx team, we are adding another 5,000 people, and it will require, again, that communication, that trust, and that resilience, and just understanding this is the long-term goal. And short term, unfortunately, we can't see each other in person. But I have to say, for the record, I did yesterday 4 communications meetings, so 2 for AMD and 2 for Xilinx. So it was a busy day yesterday.
Yeah, the 4 is the start for another 400 because it's going to take a while to make this happen. But I think you have the positive backdrop that the company obviously is doing well, and that this opens up a horizon of exciting things. And so that brings us a little bit to sort of your sense of enthusiasm for technology. If you look at the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm not looking for specific AMD things, but what do you think that high tech can accomplish that's meaningful to the entire audience here?
Well, I think, Art, back to, if you just take a look at, these last 6 or 9 months, I think technology is always an important, and especially for all of us in Silicon Valley, we've always recognized the importance of technology, but the importance has gone up like, a factor of 10, right? If you think about everything that we're doing, it's incredibly dependent on having the right technology to communicate, to collaborate, to work, to school, to frankly, solve many of these, all of the medical research that's going on. And I think that's just going to continue. That's just going to continue. So if you look at the next 5 to 10 years, it really is about how much more technology can do, to make our lives better, to make our lives, sort of more comfortable, to help us solve some of the larger, issues out there, whether you're talking about, medical research, or you're talking about climate change, or you're talking about, your next big business problem. So that's the world that we live in, and we have the opportunity, all of us in the industry, to do our piece of that. And that's, I think, what makes this industry so exciting for us.
Yeah, so I think de facto you talk about massive data and artificial intelligence, right? That brings about all these potential big changes. And you mentioned the impact on many areas, including climate change. And so, yesterday I just clicked for kicks on your website, and I didn't know that AMD was actually a company that sells fans. There's these big machines and there's big fans, and maybe somewhere there's a chip behind it. Forget the product, radiator or Radeon or something like. Are you guys, heating up the atmosphere with all this computation? And how does that link to global warming?
I will tell you what we're doing is we're putting incredibly powerful chips in people's hands. So this week we had a very exciting announcement. Actually, we launched our next generation, Radeon graphics cards. So if any of you on the line, love to game, we would like to believe that whether you're a PC builder or you're a game console lover or anything having to do with gaming.
I need to pull you back from the advertisement here, because I was heading towards the global warming here with you, right? Which is, and actually,
no advertising, just fact, just fact. We are a gaming company, and it's a great time for gaming right now. So that particular fan was part of a several 100-watt chip that can run the best AAA games out there.
But my question underneath is actually a very profound one that I'm personally struggling with as well, which is we understand that AI, the big data, can change so many things, including games and so on. We also understand that ideally we'd like to get 1,000 times more computation. That computation does consume energy. And so you can see that you can advocate that this new technology will help change the world for better. But we're also sitting in a field where most of what we do is limited by the amount of power that we can use in computation. And I'm sort of wondering which, you're CEO not only of a successful company, but also now a role model that has to speak out on the corporate social responsibility and so on. How do you deal with that specific balancing question? Where do you see that go? What can we do?
Well, I think the key is we all have to do our part, and our part in that is building technology capability that is as power efficient as possible, and that's one of the key things, as you said, because these days the performance of chips is actually not the hardest piece. It's how do we get the power out, and how do we put as many of them together as possible. But it is something that we have to look at every level of optimization in the value chain, and that's working with our customers, partners, working with folks like yourself in terms of getting the tools able to even figure out how to optimize. So that is one of the key mantras of these days is really how do we optimize for power across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be one of the single biggest limiters to both what we can do and how we do it. But that broadens the whole theme to, in your role, as said, a spokesperson, visibly so, for many things. And I wonder, is there a moment in your life where actually the notion of social consciousness came into being? It can be as a very young kid. It can be solely as an adolescent, or it can be now suddenly people ask you questions because they consider you smart and knowledgeable. And
yeah, for sure. I think we all have our personal thoughts, and I am from an immigrant family, so we've had as part of growing up, you also have some of these experiences. I think today, as a CEO, as a member of the community, I think our role in speaking up, both within our companies, as well as within the community, to try to make the world, sort of more sensitive and taking some significant actions to try to ensure that it becomes better is a large part of our job, and one of the things that again has made 2020 a different year than others in the past.
I'm unfortunately getting this sign of time's up, and it's very unfortunate because I love this discussion. And so, in closing, surprisingly, you have in the last 2.5 years gotten 18 awards and big recognitions, and completely well-deserved. At the same time, with that comes sort of this responsibility. Well, she clearly knows the answers to all questions. And so a slight assignment. Can you have this team here, SVLG, where the L stands for leadership, and it's many executives at very different levels, small companies, very large companies. Any one tip that everybody can walk away with today and say, wow, yeah, she's right about it. I could do a little bit more of this or that. Any tip you want to leave us with?
Well, the best tip that I got, again, earlier in my career was, and it sounds like a cliche, but I'll put it out there. It's run towards problems. And look, having really smart people running towards problems, it's good for your career. It's good for your learning. It's good for, the company or the business that you're part of. But that's really something that I've always kept in my forefront, because you're going to be busy no matter what you do, but you might as well solve something that is, truly important to your organization or to your community, because it's extremely rewarding when you're done.
I love that lesson, and I will take it to heart today, because engagement is the start to being meaningful and adding purpose. And in your CSR statement, you have people, planet, and purpose. And what you just said is a great example for exactly that. So to the audience, you have seen her. She is even better than the reality that has been depicted. And, we find in Lisa a person who is just intellectually fabulously capable, executes very well, but most importantly to me is trustworthy and inspirational. And, it reminds me a little bit of the 90s where, all you had to do is buy some basketball shoes and you could be like Mike. Well, in high tech, we don't need to buy the shoes. We can just try to be like Lisa. Lisa, congratulations and thank you.
Thank you so much, Art. Thank you. It's great to have been here.
Good morning. My name is James Gutierrez. I am the Vice Chair of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, the founder of Aura, and the chair of Listo. I'm very excited to now welcome to the virtual stage a friend, a colleague, and the new Silicon Valley Leadership Group CEO, Ahmad Thomas. Since stepping into the role 3 months ago, he's capitalized upon his unique blend of skills grounded in private sector business with a strong public policy background, lived experience, and social leadership foundation. He is taking SVLG to the next level, and he's the total package. I know he's got a bold agenda to talk about today, and on behalf of the board and our company member representatives, I couldn't be more proud to introduce him. SVLG CEO, Ahmad Thomas.
Thank you, James, for the generous introduction. Thank you to our entire board of directors. I wouldn't be here without you. Thank you all, a few thousand of our closest friends out there, for being here virtually today. And a huge thank you to all our event sponsors. I so wish we could be together in person, but Zoom, as we've learned over these past 6 months, is the next best thing. I want to be sure to say hello and thank you to one very special member of the audience, Carl Guardino. Carl built the leadership group into the wonderful and effective organization it is today, working tirelessly in service to our community as our previous CEO for 23 years. Thank you very much, Carl. And thank you to all our participants on the virtual stage, to the elected officials joining us, and to our panelists. This has been a great program and discussion. I want to offer my deepest appreciation to Dr. Anthony Fauci, not just for being here, but for shepherding our nation through this pandemic. We've learned to flatten the curve, social distance, and wear masks, all because of you. And now, when COVID cases are increasing and promising vaccines are perhaps within our grasp, as you just noted and heard from Dr. Fauci, we once again look to you for answers. What we also heard from Dr. Fauci, and everyone in this virtual room understands, is that our nation is at a moment of crisis and change. We stand at a crossroads, and the decisions that we make right now will in no small part determine the course of the next decade and beyond. But the stakes for Silicon Valley are no less significant. Silicon Valley has been the economic engine driving innovation and job creation for more than a generation. And as we look to the future, our industry is leading a new wave of innovation, from artificial intelligence to autonomous vehicles to electrified transportation and energy storage. Our valley and our industries will play a major role in solving the challenges confronting our nation and our world, increasing economic opportunity, creating jobs, and addressing global climate change. But the stark reality is this. Even as we tackle these issues from a technology perspective, we have to take a long, hard look in the mirror. We have to do more to make sure that we leave this world better than we found it. I view my job as CEO of this great organization to be a responsible advocate for industry, to make the case why the technology industry in Silicon Valley has no equal anywhere in the world, to address the issues facing our valley, whether it's homelessness or affordable housing or transportation, recognizing the limits of public sector resources, while also driving market-based solutions to leverage private capital and impact institutional investment. We can catalyze innovation in both infrastructure funding and delivery via public-private partnerships, bolstered by policies for smarter, more equitable development. Ultimately, I see it as my responsibility to stand up for policy changes to advance growth, opportunity, and economic expansion to make our companies more competitive here at home and around the world. And I pledge to be the strongest advocate possible for all of you, our 350 plus member companies. At the same time, I also see my role as a change agent to challenge Silicon Valley to do better. We have to live up to the principles and values that we hold dear. There is no area where this is more important than racial justice and equity. For many years, our industry has talked the talk of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's a good thing. There's a broad consensus that more perspectives make our companies stronger. Now, we must walk the walk in the boardroom, the C-suite, and with employees. And why, you might ask? Clearly, it's the right time to meet this moment. But the bottom line is the bottom line. We leave revenue and market share and innovation on the table when our decision makers and leadership teams don't reflect the communities that we serve. That's why I'm engaged in a series of conversations with leaders in this valley about the importance of addressing racial justice and equity and addressing it now. This encompasses, first, specific solutions for pledging collective action with a laser focus on hiring underrepresented minorities and women and targeted funding to assist our many amazing Black and Brown entrepreneurs. And second, spearheading action-oriented solutions and partnerships for our member companies to identify talent, creating a repository for exceptional candidates to build a pipeline for future executives of color to come here to Silicon Valley and join our member companies. These are just two initiatives. In the coming weeks, we will act within the framework outlined with concrete steps that this valley can take to bring more people of color into our companies at every level. I have no illusions. And as I'm finding just 3 months into this job, it won't be easy. Change is hard, but change we must. This is our window of opportunity. I hope you will join us in this effort and prove to the world that Silicon Valley can lead the way not just in technology and innovation, but in the social progress required to make our communities and our companies more competitive. Thank you very much.
The Silicon Valley Leadership Group and Annual Forum thank our pillar sponsors, Accenture and Alaska Airlines, Apple and AT&T, BYD and Comcast, eBay and Facebook, Genentech and KLA, Micron and Pacific Gas and Electric, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Proterra, the San Francisco 49ers and SAP, Synex and Synopsys, United Airlines and Verizon and Wells Fargo Bank. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Raquel Gonzalez, Silicon Valley Macro President for Bank of America. And I'd like to welcome you to the annual forum panel on diversity. Bank of America recently made a $1 billion commitment over 4 years to help advance racial equality and economic opportunity for communities of color. And as part of this commitment, this week we announced that we have completed 10 equity investments in minority depository institutions and community development financial institutions. Our investment will facilitate the benefits in the communities that these institutions serve through lending, housing, and neighborhood revitalization. And here at the Leadership Group, we're also backing our commitment with action. For the first time in the history of the Leadership Group, we have named a dedicated head of racial justice and equity. This leader will focus on this important work for SVLG and will advocate for issues of inclusion and diversity, both internally and in our community. She will also lead our racial justice and equity committee, diversity events, and programmatic work to help catalyze the change. And to kick off this important discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Angelica Cortez.
Thank you, Raquel. I'm so proud today to introduce at the annual forum our first set of Silicon Valley Leadership Group inclusive conversations. First up, Talent at the Top, a discussion with Melonie Parker, Google's Chief Diversity Officer, on the connections of creative ideation to representation and busting the myth of the drought of diverse top talent. Melonie will be interviewed by Minda Harts, best-selling author of The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table.
Hi, Melonie.
Hi, Minda. How are you?
Good. Always good to see you.
You too. It's great to be here today. I also want to thank our Silicon Valley Leadership Group for bringing us together. You know, now more than ever, it's so critical that we continue driving dialogue and impact in the DEI space. So I appreciate being here with you today.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. Most people are aware of Google's roots here in Silicon Valley, yet the organization leads across the globe. From introducing and developing technology, innovation, to impacting our daily lives. I know it impacts mine every day for the good. Google's movements are felt internationally, and what Google says and does matters. Melonie, under your and Sundar's leadership in the DNR space, you've set the bar high. Google has pledged to increase the representation of underrepresented minorities in the company's leadership by 30% by 2025, and investing $175 million towards supporting Black business. Can you talk to us about how Google came to these recent commitments and where you think it needs to expand from here?
I can. I'm happy to. And I really hearken back to what we just heard from Ahmad about where we need to grow and where we need to recommit. And as Google, as a company and as individuals, we came here to build helpful products for everyone. And we're committed to translating the energy of this moment into lasting and meaningful change. And this is really the first time we've seen companies being called to take such a stand towards racial and social justice. So we've recommitted at Google. And as you said, we have made a commitment to increase leadership by 30% for underrepresented groups by 2025. And we've also made an additional commitment to double our Black plus workforce by 2025 as well. And so we're really focused on ensuring that we're making sustainable progress, and we're looking at the entire system that underpins the framework of our company to make sure that we really are having the same experience for everyone, but also the same opportunities and the same access. And so our commitments are really ensuring that we're growing the workforce and opening up opportunities at an even greater and faster rate for folks from underrepresented groups.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I also want to just build on something that you were talking about, but let's dive into Google's diversity and inclusion goals. As the company that's defined analytics for our world, I have a two-part question for you. How will you measure your progress toward these goals in diversity and inclusion? And do you think it's important to share progress on these areas as you move forward?
No, I do. It's a great question. And for us at Google, data powers everything that we do. So we're informed by data, and that allows us to know how we're tracking progress and then where we're leading and where we're lagging. So since 2014, we've published a diversity annual report, and we actually have the largest publicly available DEI data set that's out there. And we do that because we're leaders and we're learners, and we want to highlight where we've made progress, but also where we continue to have gaps and where we're continuing to learn from that. So every day is a day to get it right. We're looking at data to make sure that we're reflecting the talent that's available in the markets that we serve. We're using data to measure ourselves and we look at representation, which is hiring minus attrition. So we're not just looking at how we hire and we're tracking where we're hiring from. We're also very focused on how we're attriting talent as well. And so we're working really hard to ensure that we're retaining talent. And so those are some of the concrete actions that we're taking. We see diversity more as a verb. So it's the action that we're taking to keep powering that progress towards the North Star that we've set.
I love that you said it's a verb. And so I hope everybody watching is encouraged to move into action. Let's talk, Melonie, about the benefits. In terms of measurement, I'm curious how you measure the benefits of a more diverse team in business.
So, some of it is actually very tangible when you look at innovation, when you look at creativity. For us, diversity is really critical to our mission. So Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So we aspire to give billions of people all over the world the tools that they need to increase their knowledge, their health, their happiness, and their success. And in fact, Minda, you said it as well, that you use our products every day. So we're building products for people from different places, ethnicities, socioeconomic positions, and abilities. And so we need a diverse workforce to make sure that our products are helpful for everyone, that they work for everyone. And even if you look at the Google Assistant and look at the different voices that are available and the ability to pick up different dialects, different accents, that's all a result of the innovation of the diverse workforce.
And I appreciate that. Trust me, for someone who uses that product in the house, thank you. Thank you for that. The other thing I wanted to turn to is, it's not such a fun topic, but I think it's important that we kind of address the elephant in the room. Let's talk fact versus fiction. You and I have both heard executives and some in the HR world make statements that they can't find professionals of color, the infamous pipeline problem. These talented professionals can't seem to find top talent of color. Please bust this myth and talk about how Google is finding the talent it's looking for.
I love Mythbusters, so happy to engage with you in this conversation. At Google, what we've done is really taking a look at where's the talent at and where are we going to source that talent. So if we start just with our student pipeline, a few years ago, we started a program with Howard University, and it was Howard West. And we brought students from the computer science program to Silicon Valley to give them real world experience. And in addition to bringing the students, we brought the professors too. And we did that so that we could extend the reach that we had. We've now grown that program to bringing 11 institutions. We're virtual right now, but that's a way of going and finding talent, looking outside of Silicon Valley and bringing folks in to give them exposure. In addition to that, we've doubled and tripled where we're actually recruiting talent from. So in 2019, I was looking at this data earlier this week. We hired Black Plus students from over 169 universities. I mean, just think about the magnitude of that number. Latinx students from over 160 universities, and that we continue to hire women from all over. And so we recruit from like 15 HBCUs, 36 Hispanic serving institutions, and 9 women's colleges. But look at the vastness of the universities that we're drawing talent. So it's the intentional commitment to source, attract, and then retain, as I talked about earlier, this talent. So that's how we continue to really bust that myth. And one additional thing is that I would really encourage other companies to think about too. We're very focused on culture add. So not just culture fit, but what's additive? What are we missing? How do we draw more talent in by looking at the additive skill set? So we actually offer a training on culture add. So we've had over 2,500 people go through the training so far. And the feedback is it really has helped the interviewers be more open to what are the things that we need to look to add to Google, to our culture, to the skill sets that we're hiring.
I love that, Melonie. The culture add is so important. Thank you for sharing that. And I can't believe we're almost at time, but our final topic is allyship, which I know a lot of people have been talking about lately when it comes to diversity and inclusion goals. There has been some in Silicon Valley who made it clear that they do not wish to talk about racial justice and equity in the workplace, but for all their talk, there's so many more who want to discuss it, but they might be looking for help on how to do it. We recognize that white male executives and senior leaders have a powerful influence in advancing the achievement of this work. What are the top 3 things they can do to move racial equity forward? And what does it mean to be an active ally?
So I will tell you, just as we look at the racial reckoning that we've had in the world, at Google, we've had our Black Plus Googlers really standing in pain, some of it current and fresh from what's happening in the world, and some of that past pain that's triggered by what's happening. And then we've had this incredible outpouring of allyship, of folks saying, what can I do and how can I be an active ally, which means I'm not neutral. I'm taking an active position in showing my support. So we've run these standing in solidarity sessions for Black Plus Googlers to allow to hold space and hold community. But then we've run allyship sessions for folks that want to know more. We've had about 25% of our workforce actually access these resources. And what we're saying is, one, be willing to stand and hold space. People want to be seen, heard, supported. So for our white male executives, what they can do is, one, extend who's in their network, because one of the things that Black and brown communities don't ordinarily or organically have access and opportunity to white male executives. So extending who you're networking with, go cascade a little bit further down about who's able to come in and talk to you and create actual coffee chats or virtual sessions for people to do that. And then, very important, cascade accountability throughout the leadership team of what your expectations are. And 3, visibly support and champion equity across all communities and let people know how important it is to you, and be very transparent about that, and create a safe space for people to talk about what it means to lead across differences and to champion and to mentor. And so I think with those in mind, that our white male executives can show up in a really powerful way.
Oh, I love that. I'm taking mental note too, because we can all be active allies. And the theme that you said is that intentionality and reminding about that verb, right? That action.
Yes.
So thank you for that, Melonie. I wish that we can keep this conversation going all day, but I don't want them to cut our mics. So thank you for your candor.
No, thank you. And I just want to close by thanking all of the elected officials and public servants for their work and their leadership during the pandemic. I know you had a very important conversation with Dr. Fauci earlier today. The Silicon Valley Leadership Group plays such an important role in our community and in our nation's future, especially in the face of COVID-19. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Our next inclusive conversation is representation with legislation, a conversation with Assemblymember Chris Holden. He will be interviewed by Peter Leroy Munoz, General Counsel and Senior Vice President of Technology and Innovation at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. They'll talk about the recent passage of AB 979 and where the legislature goes from here when it comes to representation.
Good morning, Assembly Member. It's great to have you here joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
You know, one of the biggest legislative achievements this past year was the passage of your bill, AB 979, which requires public companies headquartered in California to diversify their boards with directors from underrepresented communities. What led you to pursue this bill in 2020, and why is it so important at this moment in history?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the question. And let me just say that this really didn't start this year, although there was really a major catalyst in terms of what we saw in terms of the social justice movement that was sort of rippling across the entire nation. But we really embarked on trying to get a handle on how corporate boards were creating opportunities for underrepresented communities back in 2017. When myself, Senator Ben Waiso, and Assemblymember Cristina Garcia representing at that time, myself representing the California Legislative Black Caucus, Senator Waiso, the Latino Caucus, and Assemblymember Garcia representing the Women's Caucus, needed to understand how Silicon Valley was addressing the issue of inclusion and diversity at the top level of the organization, which was the corporate boardroom. And it was really our desire to really see what efforts were underway and how we were making progress along those lines. It was an initiation of a conversation, and I think that's obviously how a lot of these initiatives get started. We'll call it a starting point. Then fast forward to where we are now, because we recognize that at least having those conversations were important. We weren't seeing the kind of progress, to be candid with you, at that point. But we were hearing comments from leaders within those organizations, those companies that said, look, this is something that we believe in, and we are going to get our arms wrapped around it and look to make sure that we have goals that are going to move forward to address communities of color, and that we can address the issue of diversity and equity. But as we looked at in 2020, the concern that was coming out of the social justice movement, the recognition that there was systemic racism in institutions throughout our society. And Member Garcia and I got together and said, maybe this is the time to come back with something that can give some instruction and direction to corporations on how they might move forward in creating diversity within the upper echelons of their company. That's how 979 was born. And out of that, we worked very closely, quite frankly, with a number of companies that I believe belong to the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Certainly HP was right there at the table, being helpful, quite frankly, and allowing us to sort of understand some of the tripwires that we needed to be mindful of, how far we could go on the equity piece. But so we just sort of laid out the foundations and the fundamentals of how to get started. And that was really drawn from a bill that Senator Hannah Beth Jackson put forward the year previously in terms of creating opportunities for women in the corporate boardroom. And so it was recognizing the times, but also understanding that this is sort of a long-standing issue that we thought now was a good time to really jumpstart. And we're grateful to not only HP, but Bloom Energy and others who step up very early, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, to embrace this bill. And so that's how it gets started. And I think we're off to a good start.
Assemblymember, thank you for recognizing that the Silicon Valley Leadership Group was one of the early supporters of this. In fact, one of the only major business associations in the state to support AB 979. What role do you think Silicon Valley plays in addressing racial justice issues that's unique to this region?
Well, the Silicon Valley is sort of the home to innovation. And it's not just, we take great pride, quite frankly, in the array of companies that have called California home. And, you know, whatever, there's always a place for California to hold where we start moving down a certain course and it sends a ripple, not just a ripple, but a wave across the entire country. And it's leadership. We've done it when it comes to our environmental policies, and I see California playing a major role here. And so the Silicon Valley is interconnected. And there's so much of power that is represented by the companies that have worldwide influence. And the worldwide influence is not just because of what they put out and how they make our world interconnected, but it's the kind of leadership that they can provide in this space, which demonstrates how diversity in these corporate boardrooms can enhance the bottom line, can create opportunities for greater profits, innovation, ideas coming from communities that have historically not had a voice per se. And so I think that there's an ongoing role for the Silicon Valley community to play in terms of being a leader, being intentional behind the goals that you set, the goal, reaching out and creating that inclusive nature around your future. And believe me, it will definitely send the ripple throughout this entire country, because I already have other states and other state legislators calling, trying to understand how they might duplicate and replicate this bill. So let me just say that, in closing on this point, that you know, the spirit of 979 is also designed not just to rest in the corporate boardroom, but to change the culture, to see that at all levels of employment vertically within the organization, diversity is recognized, contracting opportunities are recognized. And this is just the right thing to do. California is a majority minority state, and it just begs the question that these corporations at the very highest level and throughout the organization should reflect the state in which the diversity represents and should be also represented within their organization.
Assemblymember, I'm so glad that you also drew that strong connection between diversity, innovation, and business success. We know that in addition to your public service, you also have private sector experience as a small business owner. Looking at the relationship between the legislature and business and the larger innovation industry, how do you see those two actors working together on racial justice and social justice issues?
Well, I think that they can really work hand in glove and very seamless. I know that there have been over time particular initiatives where leadership from the business community has stepped up and joined with the voice throughout California for change. I mean, we obviously have a proposition on the ballot to take another look at reversing Prop 209 and creating opportunities for underrepresented communities of color, to have an opportunity for contracting opportunities within the state to be enhanced. And so we're very hopeful of that. But I think that there's, going forward, there's just so much. We've done it on an environmental leadership. And I think that we can do it in terms of, again, as it relates to diversity, inclusion, and how equity could work. The issue of race is a really tough question to really get one's arms around and to have the kind of not just surface level discussion around it, but really a thought provocative, how do we systemically make these changes? Because I think internally all of us want to see that chain broken and we move forward. The next generation should not be burdened with some of the sins of the past, if you will. And I really think that this is a time where we can reckon with it and implicit bias and what that means and how we can make sure that there's training opportunities within corporate organizations to recognize it, stereotypes that can sometimes develop in us and set perceptions around how we view the world and the people around us. So I think that there's certainly, from what I gather, a strong desire on the part of the corporate leadership within, certainly through the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, to try to get your arms around this issue. And I certainly, with the new leadership, as well as your outgoing leadership, Carl, who is now with Bloom Energy, I think that there's sort of there's a real desire on the part of the people that I'm talking with to really, let's get this thing figured out once and for all. And so I think that working hand in hand, that we have a good chance of getting there.
Let's return for just a moment to AB 979 and maybe dig into the details a little bit. The bill requires that no later than the close of 2021, public companies must have a minimum of one director from an underrepresented community. Additionally, by the end of 2022, the number of directors from underrepresented communities must be at least one for companies with 4 or fewer directors, 2 for companies with 5 to 8 directors, and 3 for companies with 9 or more directors. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions for corporations as they work to meet the requirements of this new law?
Yeah, I think that one, I think this is really should be viewed as a foot in the door. 979 is not going to be the cure-all for all of the issues, but I think it sets an architectural structure for companies to start moving out on. And certainly the spirit of this bill is to go beyond what the mandates dictate, as you just articulated. It's really to say, look, let's do more. When we find the talent, when we have the availability, because a number of companies, the ones that I've mentioned, when this bill goes into effect January 1st of 2021, they will have already met the basic minimum of the bill. But I think, and I would venture to guess that many of these companies are not, when they believe it, when the culture suggests we need to do this because it's the right thing to do, it's an intentionality that we're going to embrace, then I think that, and the value to the bottom line that it brings for companies, I think that there's going to be a desire to want to exceed it. And I think that, there's training opportunities, there's promotional opportunities, making sure that bringing in talented African-American, Latino, and API communities, Native Americans and others, sexual orientation representation, that when you have the talent that you can nurture inside your company by bringing it in, mentoring and creating opportunities for upward mobility, you're already kind of developing the talent of the future who will then ascend to the corporate board level that can be part of that, fostering a continuation of a culture that says, look, it's inclusive, it's embracive, it's recognizing that diversity is good. And so I think by having firms that are out there that are very connected to certain communities, that have the ability to identify talent, that can help be part of a training institute where corporate board training can be part of the equation. I think those are all fundamental to, I think, seeing the type of implementation of this bill that again, as I said, represents the spirit of the bill that goes beyond just the clear mandates that you articulated.
And Assemblymember, I think you captured that spirit so well there. We are at the end of our time. Thank you so much for being a champion for racial justice issues and so many others in the California legislature. It's been a real pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you. The pleasure's mine.
And I'll turn it now over to our colleague, Angelica
CEO
Cortez.
to CEO on the inclusive conversation, strictly boardroom. Flex CEO Revathi Advaithi will talk to Silicon Valley Leadership Group CEO Ahmad Thomas about her route to running a $24 billion global company, and also the lessons you learn about identity when playing among the pinnacles of power in Silicon Valley.
Thanks so much for joining us on this virtual stage, Revathi. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you, Ahmad. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be part of this conversation. Looks like you had a really hectic day with a great agenda.
Well, it has been great, and I hope and I know this discussion is going to be wonderful for all listening. Everyone in Silicon Valley should know or needs to know who you are. You know, Flex is a $7 billion market cap, 24 billion in revenue. It's a leading edge company that helps very diverse customer base design and build products to improve the world. So maybe with that framing, let me ask the question of you. What has it taken to build and design Revathi into a top female global CEO in Silicon Valley?
Well, thanks, Ahmad, for the question. You know, I'd say my background, and you know, I say this often, is that my background is like many others, right? I come from very humble beginnings. I grew up in India in a family of with a family of 5 girls. So obviously, it was a very woman-dominated household. You know, with some loud voices and loud personalities on what we wanted the world to be. So I'm definitely molded by, you know, all my sisters and my parents. You know, went the traditional route of deciding to do engineering. And the thing that was non-traditional about it was I went and did mechanical engineering, which was, you know, there was no girls in my class when I did mechanical engineering. It was somewhat of an unusual field for a woman to choose. And like many others, you know, got the opportunity to come to the United States as an immigrant, you know, landed my first job in Shawnee, Oklahoma, and in a small town of 30,000 people. Was my first manufacturing job, got to be in a factory floor there. And that's kind of what started my career. And after that, I moved around a lot. I moved, you know, to different states within the US, then relocated to England for some time, moved to China in the middle, you know, came back to the US. So just, you know, took a lot of different roles, a lot of different functions within the organizations I worked for. I mainly worked for 2 companies most of my career, a company called Eaton, which is a diversified industrial company, and a company called Honeywell, which is also a diversified industrial company before I came to Flex. So it's, you know, kind of a very simple background, you know, very humble beginnings, and you know, just was fortunate that I was in all the right places at the right time, took many different roles, and all that, you know, got me to where I am today. And started with Flex actually almost 2 years ago now, 20 months ago.
Incredible. I like to say luck is where preparation meets opportunity, and certainly you've been very well prepared. And you've joined us today for our inaugural series here, Inclusive Conversations Around Diversity. Given your own identity, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? And how does your recent board seat on Catalyst, a global nonprofit advocating for advancement of women, perhaps play a role?
You know, Ahmad, I'm very excited to be part of the Catalyst board. It's got Catalyst as an organization has done some unbelievable work, you know, I would say in a very contemporary fashion to really put data and facts and good information in front of organizations on why diversity and inclusion makes sense for companies to focus on, and what are the ways to do it. So it's a real honor to be part of Catalyst. I've followed them as an organization for so many years. So to, you know, be invited to be as part of their board is an exciting opportunity for me. My life is all about, the only reason I'm here is because even though I worked in places like Shawnee, Oklahoma and Hutchinson, Kansas, you know, there were people who included me at the table when I needed to make conversations and have conversations and make decisions. So my whole life has been because there were people who were ready to include me, were ready to sponsor me. So obviously sitting on that stage, you have to say, this is important. The only way we get to, gender parity, and parity for our Black colleagues is only if we have enough leaders being passionate about this and deciding that they want to sponsor conversations in companies, and organizations, and really be part of the change. It is shocking to me to watch how few women still are there in the tech space. And then if you think about manufacturing in an industrial setting, that's a whole different ballgame altogether. And I say this often is that, the transactional elements of why people, aren't in organizations or getting promoted or in leadership roles about, flex work or telecommute, all those are, mainly getting taken care of. So it always comes down to, are people making the right decisions when you have to make a decision on that next promotion, when you want somebody sitting at the table with you, are you including them? So it requires enough people to talk about it before change really happens. We've made a lot of progress, but not enough, right? And so for me, it's really important that in a place like Flex, where we have 165,000 employees, we have an opportunity to make real impact on this topic. And we want to be part of that conversation. We want to make sure that our 165,000 people have a voice in the kind of culture we create, and hopefully that influences everybody else around us. And that's why, I think it's important to be a voice on this conversation.
Well, can you describe how you embed your values of diversity and inclusion into such a large, you mentioned over 160,000 employees, such a large multinational like Flex that you lead?
Yeah, and Ahmad, last year when I joined Flex, I was fortunate to go through a conversation with our team where we really sat down and rethought our values, our mission, our purpose, and we really rethought, what does it mean to be who we are? And, the things we do sometimes are so far away, maybe from Silicon Valley and tech, right? We're starting up a facility maybe in Ukraine or in Romania, in a small place where there were no jobs created before. And so what does it mean to be inclusive in that culture, right? And so as we were thinking about our vision and mission and our purpose and our values, we were trying to fit it and make it understandable for people all over the world, whether you're in Romania, Ukraine, or Brazil, or India, or Malaysia, or China, or here in the US, everybody needed to feel like they were included in this value that meant that we were going to treat people well. Doesn't matter where you're in the world, doesn't matter the kind of job you do. And so that's how we've tried to embed thinking about inclusion and diversity in our value system. And we talk a lot about it. We've had a lot of public conversations in our company, by very senior leaders about the topic of inclusion. We're making it okay to talk about it, about what needs to be done. And that's how we're embedding it in our day-to-day. And I'm just, our task is just, beginning, Ahmad. There's a lot of room to make this better. And we're trying to have this conversation in every corner of our company. If you are a person who's working in a shop floor and you have a life that looks different than probably most others here in tech or in Silicon Valley, we want inclusion to fit for that conversation, right? So we're trying to make it work for everyone. But the most important thing is our value is that we will treat people with respect. And doesn't matter who you are and where you come from. And that's the kind of value we're trying to drive in our organization. And we're talking a lot about it. We're making it okay to talk about it.
Which is incredibly important. And I want to return, you mentioned a few times this concept, the notion of a seat at the table. And you've talked about the board there at Catalyst. You served on the board at BAE and now recently joining the board at Uber, one of our wonderful member companies. Given how much representation matters, literally a seat at the table, tell us what it takes to serve on these large public corporate boards, how you got the board seats, and how we can get more women on these boards.
Yeah, and I think, I just love the conversation we had just before I came on and how California is leading in terms of making sure that board representation, whether it's for underrepresented people or women, is being heard, and there's real legislation to support that. For me, my journey with boards started when I was with Eaton and I was chief operating officer and leading one of their top businesses. I was part of the board process there, and got invited to be on boards just as as the nature of the role I was in, right? And I had a passion for really focusing on boards that were related to something that I could associate with, that I could understand. And so I chose a very engineering oriented board when I joined BAE. And what I really learned from sitting on boards is that there is tremendous value to have a voice that's different, right? In the case of BAE, the voice that's different is, I was a woman leader who came up through the ranks, who worked in the shop floor, who really understood kind of what it means to do all of that and get to where I was. So my voice and my points of view are sometimes different than, people who have had a different career path. And so I've had the opportunity to be on both the Eaton board and the BAE board, and bringing that perspective. And when I came to move to the Bay Area, I really understood that it would be helpful for me to, one is be in a board that was closer here, so I didn't have to travel so much, because I do have children at home and I needed to manage my travel. And being a sitting CEO, I did not want to be in more than one board. So I chose to resign off the BAE board when I got invited to be on the Uber board. And I'm very excited about being on the Uber board because it brings for me the tech framework, which I am learning and understanding, but also brings the global distributed workforce, which I understand extremely well. So it brings the best of both. And I think it's really, really important to have a seat at the table for more women, for more underrepresented people, so that we can have different points of view. And the points of view that we bring are sometimes the same, but most of the times they're unique. And that's the advantage I see from the boards I have been in, whether it's solving business issues or whether it's solving issues about inclusion and diversity. The views that we bring sometimes provide a perspective that I feel like makes the business better in the long term. And so I would just encourage all the women who are listening to this conversation is take the effort to join a board, whether it's a for-profit board or a not-for-profit board. What you learn from your colleagues, the networks that you make, really help, I would say, significantly, not only from contribution that you can make, but also how it improves you as an individual and as a leader. So I think it's a great experience that I would encourage all of us to try to be a part of.
Well, thank you so much, Revathi, for sharing your perspective. For all of you out there, if you don't know Revathi and Flex, now you do. You are a tremendous leader. Continue these important conversations. And again, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ahmad. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much to Revathi Advaithi and Ahmad, Chris Holden, Peter Leroy Munoz, Melonie Parker, and Minda Hartz. I'm Angelica Cortez, and we'll see you at the next Silicon Valley Leadership Group Inclusive Conversation.
The annual forum thanks its co-title sponsors and production sponsor. Thank you to our co-presenting sponsors. Thank you to our plenary sponsors. Thank you to our pillar sponsors. Thank you to our gold sponsors. Thank you to our supporting sponsors. Thank you to our media sponsors. And to you, the audience, thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Brennan, Senior Vice President. We want to thank everyone who's helped to make today's annual forum such a success. Our panelists, our speakers, our interviewers, and a special shout out to Eric Yuan and Zoom, whose production contributions have helped us today to bring you these very important stories.
And I'm Sara Garcia, Director of Education and Workforce Development. Before we go, I'd like to make a last plug for our Bridging the Digital Divide project. Over 37,000 San Jose area students continue to be disconnected from education as a result of COVID. If you have a gently used computer and you'd like to donate or would like to make a donation to help provide a device for a local student, we'd love your help. Details are available at svlg.org.
Hi, I'm Kat Wortham, Senior Associate of Housing and Health Policy at the Leadership Group. Don't forget, with social distancing, the Applied Materials Turkey Trot Run has gone virtual this year. You can also sign up at our website and do your run at your own speed.
Hi, I'm Matthew Quevedo, Director of Housing, Transportation, and Community Engagement. We also want to take a moment to thank the elected representatives who joined us today. Thank you all for coming and for connecting with us.
And finally, a big shout out to Shannon DeAtley Johnson, our Senior Director of Special Events at the Leadership Group. She did a great job putting together today's event for when we're all so far apart.
So from all of us at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group,
To all of you.
Thank you.
And see you next time.